Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House. One of the interesting things about question period is that the opposition, as well as any government backbencher, has an opportunity to ask questions of the government related to policy, or indeed also to make representations on behalf of their constituents, no matter where they come from in the province. Question period in the Alberta Legislature is among the longest in the country. It lasts for 45 minutes, but extension may be given to take it up to as long as an hour, as long as there is the unanimous consent of the House. Questions today probably will follow along from the provincial budget, asking certain questions with regard to the fiscal policies of the government as related to various departments. Oftentimes, of course, the main thrust of questions are directed from the opposition to the Premier of the province, Don Getty, and as spokesman on behalf of the provincial government.
Let us pray. We give thanks to God for the rich heritage of this province as found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Table the annual report of the Alberta Cancer Board for the year ending March 31st, 1987.
Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the annual report for 1986-87 for the Department of Alberta Technology, Research and Telecommunications, which has been previously circulated to members, and also the annual report for Alberta Government Telephones for the year 1987.
Okay.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Calgary-Milliken, followed by Drumheller.
Mr. Speaker, I have the pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly the General Manager of the Canadian Soccer Champions and also the coach, and that's Mr. Ron Nipshaw, our General Manager. Of course, they're from Calgary, and Peter Welch, the coach. And I would like for them, they're sitting in the Members Gallery, I'd like for them to rise and receive the warm traditional welcome of the Legislature.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly, three members of the Strathmore Town Council. They are Deputy Mayor Keith Schneider and Councillors Roy Brown and Wally Freeman. They are seated in the Members Gallery, and I would ask them to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Whitecourt.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce some 9 students and their teacher from Whitecourt from the St. Joseph's High School, grade 10. These students are taking Social Studies 13, which involves operation of government, and they're here today to view the operations of the Alberta Legislature. They're seated in the Members Gallery. I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Premier tried to defend the government's decision to spend, I'm told, $127,000 of taxpayers' money to influence the public's perception about the provincial budget. Mr. Speaker, this is a trend that's been ongoing, though, because figures tabled in the Assembly showed an alarming rate of increase in advertising expenditure by this government, some 62.5% over a 3-year period. Mr. Speaker, advertising expenditure is going up 4 times as fast as the provision of services, and this government is now spending $50,000 per day on advertising, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Deputy Premier, in view of this alarming increase, will the Deputy Premier please tell us who is responsible for checking over the content of these political advertisements? And we want to make sure that truth is there and we're not just there to improve the government's image, Mr. Speaker.
Well, there are 2 aspects of that question I'd like to respond to, Mr. Speaker. The first one is the record of the annual expenditures for advertising. And I believe, in fairness, that the members ought to examine the details of any given year, because usually there is some special promotion or advertising campaign on that may be related to tourism, it may be related to job creation, it may be related to any number of things. So there's usually a reason why there will be one or more very large advertising campaigns carried on by the provincial government in any given year. But secondly, the matter of who proofreads the advertisement, the ultimate responsibility, of course, lies with the minister of the department whose program is being advertised. And in the case of the budget ad, that responsibility rested with the Honourable Treasurer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there seems to be the biggest special promotion is to improve the image of the government. That's a major reason we have these, Mr. Speaker. But let's look at one specific to either of the ministers then, whoever wants to answer it, where it says education is the top priority. That what we're talking about is that on a school year basis, it says funds for basic education increased by more than 4%. Mr. Speaker, this is absolute and totally misleading. In fact, Mr. Speaker, if we look at basic education, the provincial contribution to the school foundation program was a 0.1% increase in the next year. My question, Mr. Speaker, is if the government's going to put ads out, will the Deputy Premier or the Treasurer make sure at least these ads are telling the truth and are not misleading to the public?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Treasurer, may want to add to the answer I'm going to give, but the 2 statements that the Honourable Leader contained in his question are absolutely correct. Education is the #1 priority of the government. We've said it. We've made it our #1 priority, and that's the truth. It's a truthful statement. Second, you're honking again. The second part of the statement, the dollar or percentage value, we will elaborate on that. But when you look at the increase for operating grants for the school year, there's an increase of 4%.
We were talking about the budget. This was supposed to be talking about the budget. It says in there clearly that the grants to the school foundation program went out 0.1%. That's the truth, Mr. Speaker. Why would you put it out and say it went up 4% when it doesn't say that in the budget estimates, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, we've had an opportunity over the past 3 months to fully communicate with the people of Alberta, starting in January of 1988, when all of the ministers who are responsible for the grant programs put very full information on the table with respect to what it is the government was doing. The statements that are found in this very important advertisement touching all Albertans simply confirms the information that we put forward in January of 1988. Now, Mr. Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition across the way last year used to jump up and say it was a -3 or a cutback budget, when in fact our expenditures were expanding, obviously we had to correct it this year so the true information was given to all Albertans.
Mr. Speaker, again, Mr. Speaker, they refuse to answer the question because they know that they're misleading the people of Alberta.
They got caught.
Mr. Speaker, which is it, Mr. Speaker?
Points of order come.
No, they carry on with the question, and then you can raise a point.
Why isn't they getting a little annoyed that they don't tell the truth and then they have to jump up, Mr. Speaker? Which is it then, Mr. Speaker, to this minister? Which is it? Is the budget estimates wrong, or is what they said here wrong? We can't have it both ways, Mr. Speaker. Which is it?
Yeah.
Gee, the member from Norwood is exciting when he trembles, Mr. Speaker. I like it when the color rises through his cheeks and he gets hot with this little touch of acting that we see across the way. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, both facts are right.
Member for Red Deer South, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Leader of the Opposition doesn't want to see the facts and accurate information get out on this budget because it's inclined to overshadow the doom and gloom that they try to spread.
Right. Order. That's enough on both sides of the House. Questions? The Chair will also make other people ask the questions without extended supplementaries.
Mr. Speaker, this was such an effective way of communicating a very sound fiscal policy of this government. Would the Deputy Premier consider in fact, investing in another page in Alberta newspapers, telling them the good news about the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's been consideration given to any number of ideas for communicating through paid advertising.
Thank you. Westlock Sturgeon.
Speaker, my question is also to the new Minister of Propaganda or the Associate Minister or the Associate Premier. In view of the fact that the propaganda has now become a political weapon of this party or of the government to try to sell people what they may not have, is he putting, or is the government considering putting out this rather lucrative contract to sell the government out for bid, or is it going to a favourite publicity religion?
Please, Minister. We don't have a Minister of Propaganda listed in the House, nor do we have an Associate Premier, so perhaps the Deputy Premier could take it on.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the Honourable Leader of the Liberals has trouble with correct titles and addresses in the legislature. I assume he was speaking to me, being the Minister responsible for the Bureau of Public Affairs, and I'll answer in that context. The ads which were placed with respect to the budget were prepared in-house under the auspices of the Provincial Treasurer. The space was paid for from the budget of the Bureau of Public Affairs, and the MLA ads that accompanied the budget ads, of course, were the paid for out of the communications allowances, which are available to each and every member of the legislature, no matter what their party's standing is. Involved, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Clover Bar.
Supplementary question to the Deputy Premier. Is there a written policy or written guidelines that make a differentiation what we as members jointly, as the members of the government did, put out an information package? Is there a written guideline for that type of material as opposed to this quasi-government edict that came out last week? Are there specific guidelines?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am aware that the allowances which each individual member has are to be used for communicating in his role as a constituency member of the legislature, and that they don't usually involve party advertising. The government advertising is based on whether or not it is a government message, a statement of government policy, or an important government message. And of course, all governments use that criteria. In the case of the budget, that's definitely an important government statement which was distributed through Alberta through the medium of paid advertising.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Career Development and Employment made it official with the introduction of Bill number 10. He proposes to take lottery money that the government receives and stash it away in a political slush fund, and he won't even have to come to the legislature for approval. The most fundamental rule of parliamentary democracy, Mr. Speaker, is that government must be accountable to the public and bring its spending plans for approval to the legislature. To the Minister, can this minister identify what it is he believes is wrong with parliamentary democracy that he is unwilling to submit his plans to this legislature for approval before he spends the money?
Mr. Speaker, I stashed the money away in 16 organizations in this province with 187 boards of directors that distribute money to worthwhile causes through 3,000 organizations across this province. If this individual wishes to pursue the bill, I enjoy his comments during second reading.
That's right.
It's only for
Mr. Speaker, it's not up for debate today, and I would ask the minister. He says in this bill the minister is to determine what is the public interest. Is the minister saying to us this afternoon that by giving money to whomever he chooses without coming to the legislature for approval, that's how he defines the public interest?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable gentleman is suggesting that that hospital equipment, specialized hospital equipment, dollars for regional libraries, $51 million to the Wild Rose Foundation and the Rick Hansen Centre is inappropriate distribution of dollars, then that's a very interesting point, and he can pursue that line of debate during the debate. If he doesn't like the way that we're pursuing our policy with lotteries dollars, Mr. Speaker, why doesn't he speak to the 3,000 organizations that are the recipients?
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, if these are such good spending that he has under this bill, Mr. Speaker, surely he can bring it to the legislature and get approval. Or is he saying, Mr. Speaker, that now he doesn't need the legislature anymore and that we should simply turn over the running of government to him without any approval or accountability?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, being from Calgary, may remember last summer where the Wild Rose Foundation was able to enhance dollars to the women's shelters. Now, if his decision is that I wait until March and come to this legislature to make that decision, I'm sorry, but the opportunity may have passed, and we just don't want that to happen. Mr. Speaker, the dollars allocated on a yearly basis, $51 million. The decisions as to where those dollars go into the community are made up of boards of directors appointed from Hay River to Milk River. They make those decisions based on applications by needy organizations, and I think that's appropriate. Is the honourable gentleman suggesting that he is smarter or has better ideas than the Albertans that are making those decisions? I beg to differ, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I take from the minister's comments that he doesn't like democracy because sometimes it causes delay and is cumbersome. I would like to ask the minister, is he asking this legislature or telling this legislature that because he has to come here and be held accountable for his decisions, that that is why he's not bringing this spending before this House?
That's precise.
Mr. Speaker, this government is accountable to the people of Alberta. We're accountable, as are the boards of the people who sit on the boards on a volunteer basis and make those decisions. I think that's extremely appropriate. They make decisions where the dollars go. We aren't. We block fund, Mr. Speaker, and I think that it's worked well since 1974. Thousands of organizations from recreation, amateur sport, culture, as I indicated, the Rick Hansen Centre. I think that's the best way to handle the dollars. And in terms of accountability, Mr. Speaker, we've had a fine record of accountability as a government for many years, since 1971. If the people of Alberta feel that we are not dealing with lotteries dollars in an appropriate way, they haven't in the past. They will have that opportunity during the next election. I challenge the member to bring it up during the next election and have a vigorous debate at that time.
Member for Calgary Milliken, followed by Calgary Buffalo, and first the chair. With respect, honourable member, the Chair would like to point out that the line of questioning is in order as long as it's dealing with the proposed legislation and is not dealing with the past issue as raised by another member of the House. Calgary Milliken.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. At present, I think the CRC grants take, on the average, about 9 months before they ever get the money. Could the minister please tell the House how many months would it take to get a grant to the people out of this funding if you had to come to the Legislative Assembly in order to get a grant approved?
When's the election?
Mr. Speaker, the dollars with respect to lotteries are for special circumstances. There are other circumstances that are most appropriate to be dealt with in this legislature. We deal with it. We are dealing with the estimates of departments by department. Last night we dealt with advanced education, and we deal with all of the departments, Mr. Speaker, and it's appropriate. With regard to lotteries dollars, it's an unreliable source of income. This government believes that dollars should go back into the community in a most appropriate way, and the decisions about those dollars going into the communities should be made by the individuals in the communities. They have, in many cases, far better ideas than we get from the people opposite as to how to run government, Mr. Speaker.
Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you. Let's forget the smoke screen, Mr. Speaker. We support the beneficiaries. It's the government's methods that we have concern about. The minister has talked about lottery funds being uncertain, but since oil and gas revenues are no more certain than lottery funds, on what philosophical basis does the minister justify making decisions with respect to lottery funds in the back rooms of the Tory caucus instead of bringing them before this legislature?
If the question can be construed as future decisions as opposed to last, I suppose it might be able to stand, but the member persists in being obtuse. I'm sorry. Or certainly very, very diligent and persistent. Clover Bar.
The Honourable Minister, in light of the fact that we as members of this Assembly have no means of questioning the allocation of these funds, and the Minister has indicated there are groups across the province, what mechanism does the Minister have in place that these groups can be brought before the legislature so we can question the expenditure of those funds? If we can't ask him, how can we ask these groups? What mechanism does he have?
Speaker, each and every one of these boards and foundations file annual reports. I must admit that there are some 22 members in the opposition. I don't believe I've had one recommendation in 2 years as minister responsible for lotteries. So I don't know what is the problem. If they have an exception, if they are taking exception to the manner in which we spend the dollars, and if there is a complaint on behalf of user groups that they're not getting enough or they're getting too much, they're willing to look at it, Mr. Speaker. But I think it's a most accountable system. It's Albertans making decisions for Albertans.
Honourable Minister, Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The Chair will now recognize the member for West Loch Sturgeon rather than Clover Bar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As to the Minister of Labour, as he well knows, more than 5,000 students in the counties of Smoky Lake, Two Hills and Thorhill have been going without schooling due to the strike that is now into its 4th week. But rather than getting sort of pious hopes from the Education Minister saying that she hopes they would settle it, and then the Minister of Labour saying that both sides are stupid, could the Minister or could the Minister of Labour now agree to go along with the Minister of Education and call in both sides in this strike? Things have gone far enough, enough is enough, and ask him to sit down and see if he can work out a solution with them.
Mr. Speaker, while the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party may think that I can work miracles, it is difficult to put sense into the heads of people who can deprive students of their education, especially those in grade 12, for whom we are all concerned on the trimester system. To try and put sense into the heads of those who have the legal responsibility on councils and the professional responsibility as teachers, when they are both at the agreed on the end point being 5.5% over a 32-month agreement, and the only difference is on the matter of when and of what size the increment should be. And I might add that the difference is about 0.5% over the 32 months. I don't think I can put sense into people's heads when they cannot see what the answer is themselves.
Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised he gives up easy for a Scotsman. Has the Minister of Education informed the Minister of Labour that this government makes money out of this strike by holding back 75% of the foundation grant as long as the strike's in process? Has she told you that they're making money?
Mr. Speaker, it is not a matter of making money. The grants to the school boards will be reduced by roughly 1/200th for each day that the schools are closed when they should be open. And while it may appear to be a saving on the Minister's budget, that is not the purpose of the strike. There are many better ways of saving money in this province than depriving students of their rightful education, in spite of the representations by the member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, that's exact.
Supplement the answer. I think it is exceedingly inappropriate that the leader of the Liberal Party would imply that the province is making money off of this strike. As he probably knows, and if he doesn't, he should, I moved within 24 hours to ensure that the correspondence lessons were in place for these students. Yes, on a priority basis to the grade 12 students, given the very important day-to-day studies that they must take place. But to imply that we are making money off the strike is very, very inappropriate. We do not pay the school grants to boards when a strike situation occurs, and I guess the parallel between two equal parties could be deemed to be the fact that teachers aren't getting paid for those days that they are not working either.
Mr. Speaker, to either minister, regardless of whatever way they want to color it, the point is whether it's 1/200th a day or whether it's holding up 75%, as the minister said. You two ministers are sitting here putting money back in the public treasury at the expense of 5,000 students out there that could be getting an education. Is that morally correct? Moral issues, I know they can't answer, but
Mr. Speaker, I don't think I'll comment on the morality of the leader of the Liberal Party. The situation is that there is a dispute between two parties, the group bargaining representatives on behalf of the several counties and jurisdictions, and the Alberta Teachers Association on behalf of the teachers. Those parties have had a history in the past of not agreeing very much in that area. Both parties obviously took to the bargaining table some previous umbrage. To allow that attitude to interfere with the due educational rights of students, especially those in grade 12 on the semester system, is reprehensible. That's the basic fact of the matter. If the parties cannot see sense within some reasonable time, then the government may have to act. But surely intelligent adults, if that's what they are, should be able to come to the agreement themselves.
Final supplementary.
Speaker, this is a strike. It's in its fourth week. Will not the minister consider this, taking some of the ill-gotten gains this government is pocketing due to the strike and putting it in the fund to help settle the strike?
I think I was referring to intelligence. I cannot understand that arithmetic.
No doubt.
The concern of this government is not about dollars. Oh, since he's not willing to listen, I'll repeat it. The concern of this government is with the education of the students, not with any financial savings by any party or any financial loss to any party. We have to look at the broad picture, and that's what we have been doing and will continue to do.
Redwater Andrew, Minister of Education, followed by Redwater Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, as we spoke to in the first question in the Assembly today during question period, the first priority of this government is on education. And it can be seen by the fact that on January 8th, the Premier and I and the Provincial Treasurer announced a 2% increase in grants to school boards effective September 1st. That is the largest increase of any of the major grant programs which this government funds because it is so important. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party asked the question about linking the dollars for education into that school board's ability to pay. And a school board is getting the greatest increase of any of the grant programs, and as well, a school board has the opportunity to go to its property tax base to supplement what it provides, what the province provides, and certainly that is an option open to those school boards.
Thank you. Redwater Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister of Labour. Has there been any meetings with the parties involved in this dispute, and I think this senseless dispute, because both sides are very stubborn at this point?
Mr. Speaker, the member raises a good point. There have been several meetings at the instigation of the department personnel and myself. As a result of those meetings, indeed, the progress was made to the current standpoint. Had it not been for those meetings, the parties might well be further apart than they are. Those efforts will continue in the attempts to get a negotiated settlement between the two parties.
Member for Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister of Education, recognizing that this dispute is basically caused by a deliberate reduction in the provincial commitment to funding education in rural Alberta. And that commitment's dropped from 85% to 63%, Mr. Speaker, over the last 12 years. I'm wondering if, recognizing that, if the Minister will consider asking her Cabinet colleagues to lift the cap on equity grant funding immediately.
Lift the cap on. I didn't hear the last part of the question, Mr. Speaker.
I'm wondering if the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is prepared to recommend to her Cabinet colleagues that the cap on the equity grant be lifted immediately and renew this government's commitment to funding education in rural Alberta.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, the member from Vegreville can't get away with that in this Assembly. The commitment to fund education for all students in this province is one which we as a government are extremely pleased about. Certainly, the ability of school boards to supplement what the province provides, and provides in a greater degree than any other grant program this year, is an issue which this government certainly has put out a discussion paper on with respect to the principle of equity, a principle which is embodied in the new School Act, which will be reintroduced in the Assembly, and the manner by which we meet the equity needs is certainly a debate that's out there and which we will welcome as we return to the House this spring with the new School Act.
Member for Clover Bar, followed by Red Deer North, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Labour, and this has to do with the $170,000 that the Minister has indicated that will be required to pay for transportation and hotel costs for union and contractor negotiations that are going on. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, as a legislator and as a taxpayer, I would like to know if it is common practice that the taxpayers' money be used, or is this a precedent-setting grant, one-time grant to further the expedition of these negotiations?
Mr. Speaker, it's an interesting question the honourable member raises. Members of the legislature will remember the passage last spring sitting of Bill 53, the Construction Industry Collective Bargaining Act. That bill was introduced in an attempt to get good negotiations going again in the construction industry where they've been absent for some time. Neither party, and you have to remember that the federations are a new way of bargaining, neither party could have anticipated much in advance of the introduction of that bill after consultation with the parties that there would be such negotiations going on. And the special warrant to which the honourable member refers was to enable funding to be given to both federations in the event that it is necessary in partial payment of the costs that have been incurred due to that system of bargaining. As yet, we have not received any firm statement from either party indicating what those costs may have been. We have some indefinite information on which that order in council was based, but as yet we haven't got a firm statement and therefore cannot commit how much money, if any, will be given to the parties.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to know what controls the Minister has in place, and I'd like to say that possibly, because we've almost offered carte blanche, this may slow the negotiations rather than speed them up. Can the Minister indicate what controls there are in place so this is not an ongoing study which may take months and cost the taxpayer even more money.
I can assure the honourable member that I had thought of that myself, and that there will in no way be total reimbursement of expenses to the federations. They will have a financial involvement in the process themselves in the event that there is a grant made to both federations, and certainly it will not be a matter of total reimbursement, which might well encourage delays in the process. I would hope that the process will not go on too long, but in any event there would be a limit to the government's payment, and as I indicated to both federations, this is not a precedent-setting matter. It's only for this particular round of negotiations that any payment will be made.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, are there any interim per diem caps so that there is a top on what will be spent in accommodation and transportation?
So far, Mr. Speaker, as I said, we have not received any detailed accounts or statements from the federations. One must remember that most of these monies have already been spent by the federations. Whether it has been borrowed or from where, I do not know. But it certainly does not encourage increasing expenditures already made. Future expenditures, I think we have to rely on the good offices of the two federations to not waste funds.
Goldbar, okay. Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister. Has the Minister put a time limit on these negotiations? It's been going on for quite an extensive period of time now, and has that time limit been communicated to the parties involved?
No, Mr. Speaker. At no time have I put a time limit on this. I cannot control the negotiating between the parties, and for that reason alone I would not put a time limit on it. One has to remember the circumstances that these two parties have had a difficult relationship for some 4 years. There is some baggage, emotional, being carried by both sides, and that of itself is liable to cause delays, and indeed it has done so. But I wouldn't put any time limit on any negotiations between two parties when I am not a party at the table.
Main question, Red Deer North, followed by Edmonton Avonmore, then Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. Recently, there's been some concern in the Red Deer area over reports of possible public exposure to radioactive material. The material in question appears to be a form of radioactive sand, which is manufactured for pipeline analysis. Is the Minister aware that recently there have been 2 incidents, one in which an employee of one of the companies apparently washed a vehicle off in a public car wash, leaving a radioactive residue, and another incident in which radioactive sand was found by the doorways of one of these premises? Can the Minister tell us if he or his department has been made aware of these incidents?
Mr. Speaker, I was as concerned as the honourable member was when I heard over the weekend of these 2 incidents. As this matter of radioactive materials is a matter under the control of the Atomic Energy Control Board, I have been advised by officials from the board on the cleanup activity with respect to both these incidents. As it relates to the car wash, I'm told that the investigators from the Atomic Energy Control Board detected some very low levels of radiation in the car wash sump sediments, and that the board was involved in the cleanup that was completed on March the 12th. In the case of a local Red Deer laboratory, where some hot sands were found on the premises of this local lab, there too the Atomic Energy Control Board was involved in the undertaking of a cleanup, and that was done on March the 25th. But I want to repeat, Mr. Speaker, that this is a matter under the purview of the federal government, under the Atomic Energy Control Board, and our officials through the Radiation Health Branch of the department, as well as through the Department of Environment, have been working closely with the board.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, is the Minister aware whether in the one incident involving the washing of the vehicle, if any charges are being laid?
Mr. Speaker, I'm told that following the cleanup that both the board and the RCMP are conducting an investigation, and certainly pending the outcome of that investigation, a decision will have to be made along those lines.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell us, given that this appears to be a federal matter under the Atomic Energy Board, has he been assured by the Atomic Energy Board that there has been no dangerous public exposure in either of these incidents?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member shares my concern, because that was one of the first things that I asked my officials to check into. And we asked for those assurances from the Atomic Energy Control Board, and we were given the assurance that in fact no public health and no workers' health was in any way jeopardized by these two incidents.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Calgary Buffalo, then Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Social Service. The Federal Provincial Territorial Working Group on Wife Battering, the report on women in agriculture prepared for the Canadian Advisory Council on the Status of Women, and the Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues have all recommended a province-wide toll-free helpline for battered women. The government's minister responsible for women's issues has indicated that local helplines are preferable to a province-wide line. Is this the position of the Minister of Social Services? And if so, does the minister not recognize that in small communities, women may hesitate to call a local crisis line for fear of being recognized?
Mr. Speaker, the whole topic of family violence is a very important one and a great concern to us that the honourable member has raised. I think it's important to note that with funding going to communities across the province, particularly from the Family and Community Support Services program, communities have been in a position to prioritize the various social areas that they wish to address, and many of them have taken action in this area.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, at the present time there may be as few as 8 24-hour crisis lines in operation in Alberta. What effort is the Minister making to ensure that there is a crisis line available to every woman, even in the remotest areas of this province?
Mr. Speaker, in again dealing with the overall area and putting in context the request for consideration that the honourable member is making, I think it's important to note that there are limited dollars to deal with this program area, notwithstanding the fact that Alberta funds both in terms of counselling for children that have been victims and in our support for shelters. We fund probably among the highest in Canada, and I think it's important that local communities also play a role.
Mr. Speaker, the answer that there are limited dollars is small comfort to the women that are being battered and their children. The minister has made a commitment to increase core funding to existing shelters, but satellites which offer rural women shelter are facing closure. Does the minister not recognize the need of rural women for avenues of escape from battering situations?
Mr. Speaker, once again, there are mechanisms for addressing individual community concerns. Again, I refer to Family and Community Support Services program, which is one unlike any other in Canada. And certainly communities individually must make decisions, as all of us must make, in terms of prioritizing the various needs that must be addressed.
Mr. Speaker, there may be mechanisms, but they're not in place. And in fact, the situation in Whitecourt is desperate. The satellite has no funding other than for job development grant money, and there are no rooms in the motels for battered women, as they are all occupied by construction workers for the new pulp mill. What does the minister have to offer these women?
Mr. Speaker, it certainly has not been brought to my attention that there is a particular community and individuals in that community who have come forward seeking assistance from the Department of Social Services, because certainly we do provide that emergency assistance. Mr. Speaker, in an overall provincial context, I think it's important to note that there is great discussion amongst professionals and others about the most appropriate way to address this problem. And I believe that in that context, it's important for us to address it in the overall, and our department is doing a review of that now.
The Minister, these are crisis circumstances, and we're experiencing them with increasing frequency, particularly in rural areas. Will the Minister, Mr. Speaker, move to formalize the funding to the satellite centres where the need may be more isolated and smaller, but no less urgent?
Mr. Speaker, I believe I have addressed that problem. If the honourable member has looked at the budget of the Department of Social Services, you will see that there has been an increase in the funds made available to the shelters presently in place. And with respect to other areas around the province that may be outside in terms of closeness in region, again, I say to the honourable member that there are funds available for communities in terms of their ability to prioritize and address those areas. If honourable members have information about a particular area where they are saying emergency social services have not been available, then I'd appreciate that information.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo, followed by Edmonton-Strathcona, and then Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question for the Minister of Career Development and Employment. The current situation relating to the Turkish refugee claimants shows how a decision by Quebec in relation to 37 refugees can throw the national immigration system in relation to 40,000 refugees into a state of chaos. The immigration provisions of the Meech Lake Accord permit and indeed encourage all provinces to seek special powers in relation to numbers and selection of immigrants. In fact, the Meech Lake Accord is going to leave us with a country having 10 separate immigration policies, a very balkanized country. I'm wondering whether the Minister can tell this House what additional rights the provincial government plans to seek pursuant to the Meech Lake changes that we don't have now.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to comment on an arrangement that is being struck between Quebec and Canada, but the honourable gentleman's premise is wrong. Quebec has no jurisdiction in the matter of refugees in Canada.
Might I repeat my question, Mr. Speaker, and that is, what additional rights does the provincial government plan to seek pursuant to the Meech Lake changes that we don't have now? Why did the provincial government support this major change in national immigration policy, which is to be provided for in the new Constitution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm still confused as to how Quebec came into this, but let me allow a moment to indicate the direction that Alberta is going with regard to immigration. We, under the Meech Lake Accord, will be offered broader powers under certain aspects of immigration. Let me reiterate, as I did in my comments speaking to Meech Lake in December of '87, that family reunification, family class immigrants, refugees should all remain the domain and the responsibility of a federal policy. With regard particularly to the business immigration side, Mr. Speaker, which I might say in 1986 brought $10 million to this province, in 1987 brought $100 million to this province and almost 1,000 jobs. Those are the reasons why we want to broaden our involvement in the immigration side. It's under business immigration and it's for economic reasons.
Well, I understand the Minister to be saying that we're agreeing to a fundamental change in the structure of national immigration policy just so we can have greater input into selection of business immigrants. And I'm wondering why this can't be accomplished by negotiation as the province of Quebec has accomplished it to date, instead of agreeing to a fundamental change which presents a danger to this country.
Mr. Speaker, there is no fundamental change with regard to the situation in Quebec with the Turkish refugees. It is a 100% jurisdiction of the federal government. The federal government has chosen to listen to Quebec on the issue. And if Quebec makes a decision with regard to settling the Turkish refugees, then I think it's appropriate. I see nothing wrong with the federal government consulting with the province of Quebec. And as a matter of fact, it's under the air of Meech Lake Accord. It's the cooperation between the two levels of government that is really the example that is being set beyond the issue in the Quebec-Canada arrangement.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to finish this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Calgary Buffalo, final supplementary.
Well, in case the minister didn't look, the immigration policies in this country are now in chaos. I'm wondering whether the minister can tell his House how we can possibly have a national immigration policy when each province is to have the authority to set its own immigration rules, as they have in Quebec presently, and as is to be provided for each province under the Meech Lake Accord that this government has brought back to the people of this province.
Mr. Speaker, for the third time, the honourable gentleman does not know what he's talking about. The responsibility of immigration is and will remain with the federal government, and I believe that all provinces agree with that. To suggest that each province would set their own levels and own criterion for refugee uptake and for family reunification is a silly one. I don't think anybody feels that that's appropriate. We've been able successfully with the federal government to deal with matters of refugees and family reunification on an appropriate basis. Last year, family reunification increased by 3% in this province. We take consistently between 10 and 15% of the refugees with 9% of the population. It's an arrangement that we sit down and consult with them. We work within the guidelines that they set and within the targets that they set for new immigrations. It's a very fine arrangement. And with regard to business immigration, Mr. Speaker, I believe that when it comes to an economic matter, that the condition in this province, we should be sensitive to it rather than allowing those decisions on business immigrants being made in Ottawa when conditions may change from time to time. So I just don't know what he's talking about, and I suppose that's because he doesn't, Mr. Speaker.
The Attorney General, followed by a member for... Honourable member for Calgary Buffalo has incorrectly read the Meech Lake Accord, apparently. It is quite clear that Parliament of Canada has paramount legislative authority and constitutional authority to set national standards, objectives, classes, and levels of immigration. And this paramountcy is proposed to continue under the Meech Lake Accord insofar as the provincial agreements that they may enter into with the federal government cannot be repugnant to federal legislation in the same field. It is quite clear. The honourable member should go back to his law books and read them, the Meech Lake Accord again.
Better read it again.
Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister for Career Development and Employment, can the Minister advise if the increase in business immigration to our province is having the effect of denying places here for refugees fleeing from oppression around the world?
Now, there's a good question, Mr. Speaker. I should say that, that there is a misconception that the number of business immigrants replaces family reunification, family class, or refugees. In fact, it doesn't. The two levels are completely different. In Alberta, the business class makes up for about 1.3% of the total immigrants to this province, and in the same context, brings about $100 million worth of investment. Now, it is not an addition-subtraction game, Mr. Speaker. The levels for refugees are set by the sponsoring agencies in this province that choose to sponsor refugees. That's clear under the legislation. With regard to family reunification, it is the responsibility of the federal government, and certainly in consultation with the provinces on an annual basis to determine levels. So there is no replacement factor whatsoever as a result of business immigration.
Final supplementary, Vermilion Viking.
Yes, to the Minister. Will the Meech Lake Accord enhance Alberta's position in targeting investment capital through immigration in the future, such as the years leading up to 1997 in Hong Kong, for example?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, since this government made a conscious decision of moving our business immigration officer from London to Hong Kong, we have had a tenfold increase in the amount of dollars invested in this province. It is being sensitive to where business immigration is the potential for investment to this province is. And certainly it's consistent with the rest of the business community that is looking to Southeast Asia for business opportunities. As we approach 1997 and the PRC, the People's Republic of China, taking responsibility for Hong Kong, there may or there may not be an increase in business immigration from that area. But I can say to the honourable member that in excess of 50% of our business immigrants come from Hong Kong.
Orders of the day.